Now, when famines come, there's no manual that says this is what you should do. Abraham, it says, he went down into Egypt. Now, I want to make this clear. When a person is going through a famine, there's nothing wrong with relocating. Here in America, you might relocate from Chattanooga to Chicago. But I believe it was wrong for Abraham to leave the land of promise. But he was desperate. It's interesting that previously, for example, in verse 8, it says that Abraham built an altar unto the Lord. He was worshiping God in the land, but now he was leaving the land and he was going down into Egypt. I think that he went down not only geographically, I think also, as we shall see, he went down morally. Now here's what happened in Egypt, and the text is clear. Abraham lied. He said to his wife, say that you are my sister, because if the Egyptians see you, Pharaoh might want you to be his wife, and he might kill me. Now, in order to understand that, we must realize that the reason that Abraham lied, and by the way, it was only a half lie really, because believe it or not, Sarah was his half-sister. But it has been correctly said, you know, that sometimes a half-truth is a full lie. In this case, Abraham was lying to save his life, he thought.
Yeah, because his wife must have been really beautiful for him to
Oh, you
do
know,
this.
she was the Liz Taylor of the day. She was maybe 65 and still beautiful, and he knew that she'd be noticed. Now, here they are. The reason that he told the lie and said, you know, say that you are my sister, is because now if Pharaoh were to take her, he'd have to pay a dowry.
So he's making money on his lie.
Absolutely, the lie is working. It says that for her sake, Pharaoh dealt well with Abraham. He had sheep and oxen, donkeys, servants, etc. And so Abraham thought, my lie is working. Like the Sunday school student who said, a lie is an abomination unto the Lord, but a very present help in time of trouble. So Abraham's lie was working. Now this raises an issue that we can't go into, but I want to just tease the audience for a moment with the idea that isn't it interesting that God is able to bless Abraham in the land, as we'll see in a moment, and sometimes the blessing of God and even money isn't proof that God really approves of what you're doing? Well, that's a separate issue, but let's move on. Now, what happens is Pharaoh finds out that he'd been deceived. He asks Abraham to leave the land, and Abraham obviously lost his testimony because there was no use him telling Pharaoh, now you ought to believe in my God, because Pharaoh's response would be, spare me. So Abraham goes back. Now it's interesting that he bounced back because the Bible says in chapter 13, again he built an altar unto the Lord and he worshiped the Lord. But you know, Lot, his nephew, didn't. You can see the consequences of Abraham's sin. First of all, I'm sure that it did not help his marriage to Sarah. We can imagine that. Secondly, Lot loved Egypt. Later on in chapter 13, Lot is pitching his tent toward Sodom, and it was like unto the Garden of Egypt. Egypt got into Lot's heart. And then, of course, Abraham also in Egypt came out with Hagar, with whom he had a child by the name of Ishmael, and we can see the conflict that has resulted throughout the ages because of that. Mm-hmm. But there are some powerful transforming lessons, John, that this story of Abraham teaches us. First of all, let's keep this in mind. The God who leads us into the land can keep us in the land. I think Abraham was wrong in going into Egypt. And in chapter 26 of Genesis, the Bible says that Isaac was in the land and a severe famine came into the land, the text says. And yet, what we find is God says, Isaac, stay in the land. And he stayed in the land, and his crop was 100-fold. And I say to the people who are listening today that God is able to protect them and to keep them right where they are. and that God is there to bless them in the midst of poverty, in the midst of discouragement, and even in the midst of famine.